What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm Noah Strackbine, joined always by my man in the corner, producer Nick Belsky. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talkers. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. The Pittsburgh Steelers. Some interesting notes, some interesting headlines have swarmed around this team within the last 24 or so hours. And well, while one name is massive, possibly headed for the Hall of Fame, one of the best of his time in the NFL, the other conversation is a guy who we're hoping one day turns into one of the best of his time in the NFL, but for right now, might be taking a backseat in 2025. We're diving into the Steelers offensive line, two names in the AFC North that the Pittsburgh Steelers might be into. And as we do every day, we're going to answer all of your questions. Again, shout out all our members. We appreciate you as always. Nick, it snowed last night because it's just what it does. It stops snowing for 10 seconds and then it snows again. I would imagine it's the same down there. You know, you ready for some hockey tonight? And how you feeling, my friend?
You're living in Pittsburgh in February. If you're surprised by snow at this point, I don't know what to tell you. But no, I am excited. I am excited for hockey tonight. It's USA-Canada Part 2 for those who don't know. I don't think there's going to be nearly as much physicality as there was. I mean, we'll see physicality. I think there's less fighting that we're going to see in this one because there is gold on the line. But I'm excited for the game. I think there's going to be a lot of eyes on it. And I think these guys, because of that, are going to want to put on a show. So I hope they do.
Yeah, me too. I also expect some fighting. There's already been some smack talk going on early throughout this week, and hockey players, man, there's just a part of their brain at times that just says, I don't care, like whatever. Hockey's also the greatest sport because outside of football, I guess, because you can get into a physical altercation with somebody and come back into the game 5 minutes later. You're totally, hey, you know what? Come on back, dude. You're fine. No big deal. You just punched that guy in the face 11 times. 5 minutes, timeout, you could come back. That's why hockey's awesome. So I expect a little bit.
Yeah, to quote the great Denny Lemieux from Slapshot, you go to the box and you feel shame. And then you get out and you do it again.
Yep, exactly. Shout out and looking forward to tonight. Let's talk some Pittsburgh Steelers football. We'll start with the offensive line. Position we haven't talked about, I don't think, nearly enough this offseason. We just look at it and say it's a developmental piece. It's a piece of the Pittsburgh Steelers that in 2025, you're going to see what you get, and then you're going to hope for the best. And if nothing else, you're hoping for the future to look much brighter than it is right now with the guys that are in place. Well, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's Ray Fittipaldo says that might not be the case, that the Pittsburgh Steelers are not expected to hand the starting job to right guard Mason McCormick and instead plan to bring in some competition. And that comes with many questions, two very big ones. Is he the pole position starter? And if he is not, if this is real competition that the Pittsburgh Steelers are looking to bring in, what is the level of that competition? Because it varies. You could bring in another Mason McCormick. They have one on the bench. His name's Spencer Anderson. Why wouldn't you give him the opportunity to compete with Mason for the starting job? And if that's not enough, what are you looking for? Because it could go as high as Trey Smith and say, we're going to get a superstar. You could go get a guy like Mekhi Becton out of Philadelphia if he hits the free agency market and say, this guy is not a Trey Smith, but he had a very good season at a new position. Maybe that's the guy that we're looking for. Or maybe you just go out and draft somebody. Or maybe you try to bring back James Daniels. I think there are a bunch of options. I'll ask you, Mason McCormick, is Spencer, if it's not Spencer Anderson, how high are you shooting if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I think James Daniels coming back would be probably the best option for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like, let's not forget, he didn't have a great start the last season before the injury, but the year prior, he was probably their best offensive lineman. And I wouldn't be surprised if he comes back and becomes one of the best backup offensive linemen you could have. I mean, this guy was playing at a high level. If you bring him back to be competition, potentially to be the backup by the midway point of the season, if Mason McCormick kind of wrestles the job back from him, I think that's a really good place to be if you're the Steelers. We saw what happened last year. You need depth. So the fact that they might go out and get more depth should not surprise anybody, especially after the Senior Bowl when we heard them having rave reviews about Gray Zabel out of Dakota State. But bringing back James Daniels would make some sense, especially because he's coming off that injury. I'm sure he's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. And when it comes to backups in this league, you could do a lot worse than James Daniels. And I'm not saying that to compare it to what we talked about yesterday with Daniel Jones. I actually believe that James Daniels is a good option for the Steelers to come in and not just be the backup, but potentially, if need be the starter, because he's done it for multiple years.
Yeah, to be very honest, though, I don't think James Daniels, you don't think James Daniels would get a starting gig with most teams that need a guard this offseason?
Potentially.
I think if he doesn't get hurt, he's the second biggest name on the market this offseason because he's only 26 years old.
Well, I mean, if that's the case, then that's the level. That answers your question. How high are you willing to go? If James Daniels is number 2, I'm willing to go as high as number 1, because if you're already at number 2, why not go to number 1?
I agree. I could see the Pittsburgh Steelers bringing James Daniels back for a reasonable deal. I don't expect this to happen, but I was kind of thrown off by the Mason McCormick thing. So I'm reacting to this as everybody else is. And I can see James Daniels being an option for the Steelers. I think it's less likely, especially because Ray Fittipaldo reports that there's probably going to be competition, and Jerry Dulac says James Daniels is not going to come back. Chances are they know the same people. They're talking to the same people. They're talking to each other because they work for the same place. So that one, is a bit confusing, or I guess maybe less likely just in my own mind.
Mm-hmm.
But I could see James Daniels coming back for like a reasonable deal, and the Steelers giving Mason McCormick another year to develop, and then saying next year, after you mature behind James Daniels, which is what you were supposed to do last year, you become the starter on the left side for Isaac Seumalo, and that gives the Steelers a good starting line now, depth with Spencer Anderson and Mason McCormick. You probably still bring back like a Ryan McCollum or a Nate Herbig as your backup center, and then a year from now, you move Mason into the starting lineup. I could see that happening. It also moves Mason back to his natural position on the left side, which I'm a big fan of. And I think James Daniels is good. The bounce back from the Achilles is a total mystery. Nobody has any idea. I mean, you look at some guys, it takes years. You look at some guys, it takes 1 year, and that's a 350-pound man, who's supposed to be athletic. That is very difficult to do. But I could see it as an option. Are you against Mason McCormick being on the bench this season?
I wouldn't say I'm against it. I like the fact that they're going to bring in some competition, because last year I thought he held his own very well, certainly better than I expected. But there were games where you looked at it and you said, well, he looks like a 4th-round rookie. Yes. And I understand that the jump from year 1 to year 2 is usually a substantial one. But if you're the Steelers, what's the one thing you need to key in on this offseason? Making sure that this offensive line, these young pieces that you have that have really high ceilings, pan out. And if you just continue to kind of bash your head against a wall, especially like you mentioned, in the wrong position on the wrong side, that's not always the best way to get the most out of your draft pick. So if they're going to bring in somebody else for him to compete with and then potentially end up shifting him over, which we seem to have this conversation about pretty much everybody except for Zach Frazier, then I'm certainly not against that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I'm honestly I'm okay with it. I think Mason McCormick deserves at least a shot to be the starter in 2025. I think it's not a bad thing necessarily if your expectations are aligned correctly, that in 2025 he's your starter. I'd be okay with that. I really would. I would also kind of be okay with McCormick moving over if Isaac Seumalo, who I don't think should be gone, was to be released as a cap casualty, and then you try to re-sign James Daniels. I like Mason McCormick, and I do think he's the future. I think it could work out in the Steelers' favor that James Daniels is young enough. He could also be the future. I mean, he's 2 years older. That's crazy to say. He's 2 years older than Mason McCormick and Zach Frazier. That's actually super nuts because he's been in the league for, I believe, 5 years at this point. And I think that allows you to have 4 guys, hopefully with Broderick Jones being your 5th, to develop nicely. And right now you're only paying one of them, hopefully, for kind of cheap. I don't think I'm super opposed to it. I'm interested to see where they go, though, because I can't sit here and say that there's a name in my head that makes sense for the Steelers to bring in as competition. I also don't know, like in my eyes, if you bring an outside name in, James Daniels is different. But if you bring an outside name in that was a starter last year somewhere in the NFL, it gives me Kenny Pickett vibes of the guy that you just brought in is clearly going to be the starter, but you're going to tell Mason McCormick that it's competition. You draft a first round Gray Zabel, gives me the same vibes. That's, Troy Fautanu, Broderick Jones. That's what it looks like to me. James Daniels, a guy who hasn't started in the NFL yet. Okay, that's real competition for Mason McCormick. I still think James Daniels walks away the winner in that competition if he's healthy, but I think that's the closest thing you'd get to real competition for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it go the other way around too. If you draft a 4th round guard, Mason McCormick is your starting right guard in 2025, So I don't know where the line is, but I'm interested to see where it falls out. All right, let's talk some running backs. We've talked a lot of running backs. I actually watched Mike Mayock on the Rich Eisen show today, but I think it was from yesterday, of him breaking down the running back class. And he said that he has Ashton Genty, Amarian Hampton, Travion Henderson, and Quinshon Junkins all within the top 20 picks of his like big board. 20. That is 4 running backs. That is absolutely nuts. What he did say, though, is that at the end of the draft, it is a fall off. That it's still very good running backs, and there are more running backs in the NFL draft than there are spots on rosters for those running backs. But he said that the top end talent in this draft is significant. And, then it goes to normal level NFL draft talent. Well, Jeff Hathorn, one of the best on the beat. There is maybe no nicer human being on the planet that covers the Pittsburgh Steelers or any other Pittsburgh sport at all than Jeff Hathorn. Shout out. Says that the Pittsburgh Steelers are believed to have some interest in the one and the only AFC North superstar, Cleveland Browns legend, potentially the next guy to go from one AFC North team to the next, Nick Chubb, who's a year removed from a devastating knee injury caused by Minkah Fitzpatrick and is entering free agency in a year where you could say he wants to go back to the Browns, and he probably does. But if the Browns were a winning football team, it'd be a lot easier to say that that's what he's going to do. Right now, you could probably look at it and say anybody who's a free agent in Cleveland isn't 100% sold on going back because they don't know how bad it's going to be. And they want to win some football games. And Nick Chubb, near the end of his career, almost definitely wants to win some football games. Nick Chubb to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, I look at it as maybe a running back 1, probably a running back 1 if he's back to Nick Chubb, which is a big if, but if he's back to Nick Chubb, you could go Jaylen Warren as your running back 2, and then I guess you're bringing in a rookie as your running back 3. My only issue there, and I think I could go for it and to it, is, or for it and against it, is I still want the Steelers to draft a running back within the first 4 rounds of the draft. I would like them to draft one higher than the 4th. But at the same time, I'd be very okay if the Steelers went defensive line early and wide receiver early in this NFL draft. And if they double dipped at defensive line, I'd be even more okay with that. So if it worked out where it was Nick Chubb, Jaylen Warren, and a 4th round, 5th round rookie, I think I might be able to get on board with that, depending on the name. I don't think it's the best answer, but I do think it's a combination that I'm not shutting down completely when it comes to the Steelers. Your thoughts?
Yeah, for you, it's always for a third running back, you want a rookie or a Rico, and that's Rico Dowdle because you've mentioned him a couple times too.
Yeah.
I don't know how much I like betting on Nick Chubb because he hasn't been, to quote Mike Tomlin, Mr. Chubb since that night in Pittsburgh. Obviously, he didn't play the remainder of that season. He missed the early portion of this past season when he came back. He had about 300 yards in 8 games played. He was fine. He had 3 touchdowns on top of that, but I'm not willing to take a huge risk and a huge bet on a guy like Nick Chubb because he's going to be 30 years old. He's coming off of that knee injury, and I understand that he got back to playing last year, which is good, but are you really going to put the fate of your offense, an offense that is going to be predicated on the run first, no matter who comes in at quarterback? If it's Justin, if it's Russell, if it's Aaron, they're going to want to, in Arthur Smith's offense, set things up with the run. The Steelers have always done that, and nothing tells me that they're going to change that in 2025. Are you willing to put that on the shoulders of an almost 30-year-old running back who had one already major knee injury less than 2 calendar years ago? That's the big question for me. Right now, his Spotrac market value is supposed to be a 1-year deal at $3.3 million. The way I look at this is, if you sign him to that deal, it's low risk because it's 1 year. It's not a lot of money. You can also bring back Jaylen Warren on that tender because we all expect them to do that anyway. And you can utilize one of those 3rd, 4th round picks on a running back. And if things don't work with Chubb, you start to shift things to the young guy. That's the only way in which I'd be okay bringing in Nick Chubb, but I'm still a little wary of giving the keys to the castle for a running offense to a guy coming off of that injury and nearing 30 years old.
I agree. You had me convinced, and then just like you said, you lay out the Spotrac estimated market value, and you go, okay, well, even a banged up Nick Chubb may be worth taking a shot on for $3 million.
The upside is there. The upside is 100% there, but the likelihood of reaching that upside to me is not enough.
No, I think if you could bring him back again if you could bring in Nick Chubb, if you were to bring in Nick Chubb, the requirements in my head are Jaylen Warren, because chances are he's going to be your starter. Nick Chubb will be your number 2, and a rookie that has the upside to be your number 1 in the future, which there are a few of them in this draft. And depending on how they go, like, that's my thought process always, is the Pittsburgh Steelers, like every other team, will watch the running back market. If Ashton Genty falls to 21, which Daniel Jeremiah had him doing in his latest mock draft, the Steelers take Ashton Genty. But if he falls to 20, okay, when does the next running back go off the board? Does the next running back go off the board at pick, I don't know, Dallas in the 2nd round? And then at that point, when does the 3rd go off? Is that the end of the 2nd round? Like, you could go into the 3rd round where Travion Henderson and Caleb Johnson are still sitting there. At that point, you got a shot in the 4th round to get somebody who isn't them, but is close. And I think that's okay in my head, but I agree with you. I don't think you could bring in Nick Chubb and say, you are the star. I would love to say that. I would love to have the belief in that because Nick Chubb is a legend, but I just don't think realistically that's, the best option for the Steelers. In your perfect outcome of the Pittsburgh Steelers right now, and this might change, maybe it doesn't. We'll probably also lay this out like 40 times throughout the offseason. What is your perfect outcome for the running back room?
I mean, Jaylen Warren is the free space in that one. I think that you automatically bring Jaylen Warren back. Outside of that, I want one of those top 4. I think we said top 4 or top 5. I throw Marion Hampton in there. I throw Caleb Johnson in there. The 2 guys from Ohio State, and obviously Ashton Genty, if he does so fall to number 21. I think I want those 2 as my 2 leading guys. And outside of that, you've mentioned him a couple times, and I've come around a little bit on Rico Dowdle as a number 3 option. It's not awful. I mean, the Steelers have struggled to be able to run the screen. Jaylen Warren has speed, but he hasn't been able to effectively run the screen. Part of that is the offensive line, but I think part of that is also the way that he's been running it. Rico Dowdle's a guy that I could see being your screen back or being your gadget player. And I understand fans have a negative connotation with that, but as a number 3 back, I'd rather have a Rico Dowdle in that position, certainly, than what we had last year with Cordero Patterson. So I think that if you get a name like that, it doesn't have to be Dowdle. It could be somebody similar, just somebody in that 3rd role that can come in 1 or 2 plays a game and be electrifying and be somebody who can change the pace a little bit from what you have in 1 and 2. But I do want Warren. And honestly, looking at this class, I disagree with what was said earlier. I don't think 4 running backs are going in the top 20 because that just doesn't happen in the NFL draft. And so I think that they're going to have an opportunity, whether that be in the 2nd or the 3rd round, to draft somebody that can go mano-a-mano, head-to-head, carry for carry alongside Jaylen Warren, with Warren probably carrying more of the load in the first handful of weeks.
Yeah, I agree. I look at it the same way. I think you could intertwine Rico Dowdle and Raheem Mostert and maybe double dip in at running back late in the draft. I think I'd be okay with any of them. But I agree. You got to go Jaylen Warren. You got to get one of these running backs. You have to. Like, best case scenario is Ashton Genty, who's worth a 1st-round pick. And worst case scenario is Henderson or Judkins or Caleb Williams or Hampton or whoever you have last on that list of 5 and say, he's the future. It's Jaylen Warren and him, which will eventually turn into him and fill in the blank. And that's what the Steelers are looking for right now. It's been a long time since Najee's a great running back. He is. Najee's a great running back. And he's going to do just fine on another team. I really, truly believe that. But it's been a long time since the Steelers have had a Le'Veon Bell. It's been a long time since they've been able to sit down and say, our running back is dominant. And they need to try. It's just like the offensive line. At some point, you had to invest in it. And you had to make it hit when you did invest in it. The defensive line, that's where they're at right now. Right now, you have to invest in the defensive line because it's been a while since you've really invested young talent into that position. The linebacker core was the one before that. The corners was the one in between that. And now it's wide receiver, running back. You got to get those guys because your offensive line, you put the work in. Go get a running back, go get a wide receiver. I think running back is massive for the Steelers this offseason. And Jaylen Warren's great, and I think he's got a ton of upside still in front of him. But you have an opportunity to get a guy who has superstar potential. Go get a guy like that. And I think that that's important for the Steelers. Let me toss a different name at you. Let's say the Steelers bring back a guy like Justin Fields, who, I still believe is the guy. Everything that I've heard feels like Justin is the guy. If it doesn't turn out to be Justin, it'll probably be Russ, but they want it to be Justin. It's kind of more so, is it going to work out? Say they bring back a guy like Justin Fields. In the AFC North, vets are dropping like flies right now. And the other report out of Baltimore is that the Baltimore Ravens might move on from Mark Andrews, who, I get it, everybody's going to say, drop the ball. He dropped the ball. Drop the ball. Every time. I get it. We covered Deontay Johnson, dude. We were here through it all. I heard Dropson 7 billion times in the course of 2 seasons. I get it. I understand. But they say a young quarterback, a developing quarterback's best friend is a tight end. And Pat Freiermuth is great. I like Pat Freiermuth a lot. I think he's got way more upside than he has shown in the NFL to this point. But maybe the Steelers could go out there and get a Pat Freiermuth and a Pat Freiermuth's best friend, who could be Mark Andrews, which allows you to utilize Darnell Washington at a pace that the Steelers, for some reason, only want to utilize Darnell Washington. They don't want to give him anything more. I'm just saying, Mark Andrews gets released. T. Higgins is off the board. You're not spending $30 million on a wide receiver anymore. Would you consider it if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers? Should they consider it if it happens?
I would pass. I would personally pass. And it's not because of the drops. It's not because of the drops, because you cannot judge someone based on their worst moment. I firmly believe that. And I hate the fact that Mark Andrews is still getting crucified for what happened in Buffalo a couple of months ago. But I'm still not touching him. Why? Because I have belief and I have faith in Pat Freiermuth with a quarterback that'll actually utilize the middle of the field. Okay. Last year, towards the end of the season, you saw that Russell Wilson would drop back and there would be 2 places he could go: outside the hashes to the left, outside the hashes to the right. And where is the majority of Pat Freiermuth's routes? To in the middle of the field. So he had himself a pretty decent season with that being considered. I trust that if you bring somebody in that'll actually utilize the middle of the field, i.e. Justin Fields, I think Pat Freiermuth will be a number 1 tight end. And whether they want to use him or not, they should. I have faith in Darnell Washington if utilized. Now, whether or not they do, that's up to them. But if I'm roster building, I say there's a piece there, there's a piece there. I don't need to add to this room. I have places outside of that I desperately need to add to that we've already talked about. I'm not looking at tight end as something that the Steelers need to make a heavy investment in this summer.
Okay. Are you adding at all to the tight end room?
I mean, you can add a third stringer and bump out Connor Hayward, because I've been very vocal about my thoughts on his position in this organization. But, outside of that, you're adding a third tight end. It's Michael Pruitt. Sure. Keep it as Michael Pruitt and then bring in a fullback, because the Steelers should probably think about that.
Okay. I think I'd add another pass catching tight end. I like Darnell Washington. I think Darnell Washington's got way more to him than the Steelers want to give him the opportunity to have. I do. But sometimes I also have to take into consideration that the Steelers don't listen to me, and my thoughts don't mean anything to the Pittsburgh Steelers, which means that if they continue to utilize Darnell Washington the way that they've been utilizing Darnell Washington, they're going to need somebody else to help with Pat Freiermuth. And I think that they could potentially get that guy somewhere. I don't know if it's a Mark Andrews. I think Mark Andrews would be very interesting. I do. I think I just think Mark Andrews is really good, and Pat Freiermuth is really good. And don't get me wrong, the New England Patriots, you have two tight ends, does not work. Okay. That is, you need a Pat Freiermuth, you need an Andy Reid, you need a Bill Belichick to make that happen. Go look at, Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, who 2 years ago, the Patriots were blowing up the headlines because they signed every tight end on the free agency market and didn't touch a wide receiver. I don't think that works. But I do think that if you had both of them, you'd have the best safety blanket in the NFL for that guy. That being said, I don't want it to be skewed. Pat Freiermuth's your number one. Like if Mark Andrews comes to Pittsburgh, it's Pat Freiermuth, Mark Andrews. Reps should show as such, unless, Pat stunk, but I don't think that would happen. I would add a number 3. I don't know who that number 3 would be, but I think I'd add a number 3. This draft class is actually pretty deep with tight ends. I think I'd be okay with that. Go get Jason Taylor's son, whatever his name is. If he makes it to the 3rd round, whatever, him and Darnell and Pat, and just go get Ben Skoranek and have the slowest receiving core in the NFL. I mean, that's the Steelers' motto, and I think it could happen. Yeah. I think it could happen. All right. Shout out Mark Andrews. Shout out Nick Chubb. Hopefully, shout out Mason McCormick. But a very interesting turn of events, I think, for the Steelers. And honestly, a development in Mason McCormick that I look at and say, okay, there's more going on with the Steelers than we think they are. The poke the stick meme's been real heavy the last couple of weeks. It's been crazy, actually, where our brains and everybody else's brains, mostly other people, other talking heads' brains, that have really taken off. And it's good to have some hard, what could change for the Steelers? Well, this could be a real one that does. And I think the trenches are always important in situations like that. All right, that's everything on our agenda. Let's finish off the show the same way we do every single day. We're going to start answering all of your questions. If you got them, toss them in the chat. Once again, shout out our members. I am so looking forward to call-in show number 3. And if you are a member, you could start calling in as of yesterday. So leave those messages. I'm excited to hear from you guys and your thoughts and your questions, and I'll dive into them. But for right now, we're going to answer them right now. Nick, what do we got?
Yeah, let's kick things off with Marlon Lewis, who says, could you see anyone being traded to get an additional 2nd or 3rd rounder in this year's draft?
No. To be honest with you, I don't know if the Steelers have. I mean, George Pickens, but I think you'd get a 2nd for George. I don't think you'd get a 1st for George Pickens. I don't think anybody else, though. And nobody else comes to mind that would be a realistic trade. I don't think you're going to trade Larry O. I don't think anybody's going to really want him for that price tag. I don't think you're going to trade Cole Holcomb. You'd get nothing for a guy that suffered a knee injury that took him a whole year to come back from. Who else? You'd get nothing for Isaac Seumalo. nothing. And you don't really want to get rid of Isaac Seumalo, especially if you're considering Mason McCormick not being a starter this season. There really just aren't any names outside of George. He would be the only one. I think you could get a second for him, and I still think that's on the table, but I don't think where we sit right now, I expect anybody else.
Let's go to Marlon's second question here, which is, Nick and Noah, do you guys agree with Ben Roethlisberger saying free agents don't want to come to the Steelers?
No, I mean, yes and no. I think there are some, but I also don't think that there are many. Like I said, there are a lot of NFL players who do not look at the Steelers the same way that me, you, Marlon, Stephen A. Smith, the Pat McAfee show, all those people look at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Those within the NFL view the Pittsburgh Steelers differently. And Ben is now one of us. You know, he sees the Pittsburgh Steelers from how we see the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it's very easy to understand why he thinks that. But no, I still think that if the Steelers called T. Higgins the second he hit the market, Chris Godwin is a great name. I would imagine Chris Godwin would be very interested in coming to the Pittsburgh Steelers if they had a quarterback under contract. Aaron Rodgers, you know, Dante Jackson would want to come back. I think it's open. I do think the Steelers are still a hot destination.
Yeah, I agree that the Steelers do have some value to certain players. I agree that I think it's overblown when people say they don't want to come to the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I do agree with Ben to a certain extent that it's not as, flashy. It's not as appetizing to come to the Steelers as it once was. That they used to compete for championships. As Ben said, they don't do that anymore. They compete for a 9-8 season, and everybody can see that. So there are still reasons to come to Pittsburgh. It's attractive for the reasons that opportunity is attractive for a lot of these NFL players because they can't get it in some of these other markets, and you go to Pittsburgh and you get that with all the other pomp and circumstance and the Tomlinisms and whatever. But I do agree that to a certain extent, the shine has kind of worn off the Pittsburgh Steelers organization. It's not a top destination, at least I would imagine in my eyes. I do agree though that there's still desire to come to Pittsburgh from some of these free agents. But
the Steelers, my argument against that one is, and like what Ben too, like I thought it when Ben said it, is this: when were the Steelers ever like we're the team for the big giant splashy free agent?
They weren't, but there's people that probably wanted to be that free agent for the Steelers, but the Steelers were like, I'm not paying you that.
Maybe that's definitely possibly the case. But I don't think that the Steelers have the track record to say anything's going downhill. You know what I mean? They've always gotten the Deshaun Elliott's. The Deshaun Elliott's have always wanted to come to Pittsburgh. The Van Jeffersons have always wanted to come to Pittsburgh. You know what I mean? The Isaac Seumalo's have always wanted to come to Pittsburgh. The T. Higgins, I could see. You know, the Odell's, when we were talking about him during the season, I could see that one easy, how he does not want to come to Pittsburgh. But I don't think 10 years ago he'd want to come to Pittsburgh either, unless maybe when Ben was here. But the Steelers have always, I just don't know where the starting point is with them. I agree with you, though. If you are the Nick Chubb, Mark Andrews would be two great examples. If you are a guy that says, I'm trying to win a Super Bowl this year, that's where you're spot on. The Steelers are not first on your list. They're probably 10th on your list, depending on how many contenders need a running back, you know?
Yeah, I mean, of the bad teams, the Steelers are the most out.
Yeah, they're the best.
And that's the best way to say it is, of the crappy teams, yeah, at least if you go to the Steelers, there's some history there. Sure.
Exactly.
Let's go to Danny, who says, I read a story about Marlon Humphrey potentially being a cap casualty. As much as I think it's BS, how nice would that be across from Joey Porter?
Yeah, I mean, it would be. I'd put him on the inside, to be honest. I'd put him as a nickel and maybe bring back a Dante Jackson, but I think a Marlon Humphrey as that guy would be so good. Like he would do the Steelers utilize that position so much. It would be so helpful to have like the guy. You know, think about how good it was when Mike Hilton was in his prime, when Cam Sutton was really good on the inside with Mike Hilton. It was crazy. That's what the Steelers could definitely use, you know, and they have not had that, and they've been trying to find it, and they have not been able to since Mike Hilton.
And imagine the podcast recordings with Marlon and Deshaun Elliott.
Oh my gosh, every week. It'd be unbelievable. That would be our Aaron Rodgers, Pat McAfee show. Easy.
Let's go to Roger Steeler. Appreciate you as always. Says, what would it take for Tomlin to finally be fired after the 2025 season record-wise, or even then?
I mean, Mike Tomlin would have to pull an Antonio Brown and leave in the middle of a game. That's probably the only way that he'd be fired. I just don't. There's no chance. Mike Tomlin could go winless in 2025. I still would say the chances of Mike Tomlin being fired are not zero at that point. If he lost every single game in 2025, I think he could lose every game in 2025 and every game in 2026. And I'm not saying that it's more than 1%, but I would say it's not zero. I would definitely say it's not zero. That's how, like, Rooney, today, I had a conversation today that was about many things and then ended with, hey, just so that you know, Rooney and Tomlin are closer than they've ever been. And I said, all right, thanks. Like, I'll let the people know they're not going to be happy about it, but I'll let them know. So it's zero. It's 0% chance.
Let's go to Doug B, who says, shout out Nick and Noah. Do you think we should be dealing Minkah? He was very quiet this past year.
Yeah, I think there's an argument to be made to move Minkah now before it's too late to move Minkah. And I think he is nearing that point. I think this year is like the crossroads of, if Minkah's phenomenal this year, you're going to keep him anyways. But if Minkah stinks this year, you're stuck with a guy who isn't playing great football and is worth way too much money for other people to want. So I do think there's an argument to be made to trade him. It depends on what you could get for him. But I think you could, I honestly think you could get a second-round pick for Minkah Fitzpatrick. Like a good second-round pick for Minkah Fitzpatrick. Maybe even a first, depending on the team. Like, Minkah's still viewed as a phenomenal player within the NFL. And I think there will be teams that offer like a pick higher than we thought it would be.
Yeah. After one bad year, NFL teams are still going to look and say, oh, I can fix that. After 2 bad years, they're going to be like, I don't think I can. And if I'm going to, I'm going to fix it for a 7th. That's the best you're going to get. So if you're going to trade them, the time is now. If you're not going to trade them, which is more likely, then you're just not going to trade them.
Yep. You go to that crossroads, that line between like potential first-round pick for him and Jamal Adams is very thin.
Yeah, it's almost like whenever you have a car, like you have to make sure you trade it in before the value flips. And
you get that one day, that Kelly Blue Book email that says, yeah, your price is now devalued by $40,000. Thanks.
Yes, exactly. Let's go to Adam, who says, Nick and Noah, lifelong Steelers freak show of a fan here. If Aaron Rodgers is our 2025 quarterback, I will not watch a singular game. Am I overreacting?
Maybe a little bit. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is the worst thing in the world for the Steelers. I'm not in favor of Aaron Rodgers, but I also believe that there's still value in the name Aaron Rodgers. And until he retires, there's value in the name Aaron Rodgers. Like, that's just how it is. You just never know. You have a pretty good idea, but you never know. And because of that, I think, most likely it doesn't work out very well at all. But there is the shot that it does, and you go, wow, I don't think Aaron Rodgers was even expecting this to happen. And I do think that possibility is still there. People were saying it about Brett Favre when he was at the end of his career. The fall off was not this, but people were saying it about Brett Favre.
Let's go to Dobby Has a Sock. Says, hey guys, been a while. We got 12 inches of snow here in Virginia Beach. Fun times. My question is, if Ashton Ginty is gone, what are your thoughts on Cam Skattebo out of Arizona State? That dude is a beast. Does he fit what the Steelers are looking for, though?
I don't think Skattebo is I think there's potential, and Nick talked me into this, that he doesn't even get drafted. And because of that, I think I view him as, a number 3 at best, and maybe a number 3 that you're willing to take a shot on. I do. But I don't think he's going to test very well. And the running back class is so strong up front that I don't think I'd be looking at Skattebo as a name that's an eventual starter. And there are so many in this draft class that I think are an eventual starter. Also, 12 inches of snow, dude. I'm so sorry. It stinks. But we're almost there. 1 month tomorrow is spring.
This is why DC is so funny. That's further south than me. We didn't get 12 inches of snow. We have no snow as of right now. It's cold, but no snow.
I hate it. I hate every second of it.
Let's go to Shower Curtain, who says, I saw a report on how Mike Tomlin does not want to use the middle of the field. Is this good for Russ and or Aaron Rodgers?
Oh, that would blow my mind if an NFL head coach, you want to talk about a reason to fire somebody. If an NFL coach says, don't throw it over the middle of the field, that's a bad idea. What? I don't know where the reports came from. I'm not saying it's you, obviously, but they're probably wrong. They're almost 100% wrong. I would imagine. It does work really well for Russ or Aaron Rodgers if that's the case. But I find it so hard to believe that like Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts win Super Bowls using the middle of the field, and Jalen Hurts less, but Patrick Mahomes and all these guys, and Mike Tomlin's philosophy is to say, just avoid it. I don't even know why we paid Pat Freiermuth. There was no reason for that. We have George on the outside, throw it deep. That would be nuts, actually.
Let's go to your good friend, Smoody Booty, who says, why would Pittsburgh ever take a wide receiver in the first round? They never do this.
They never do. But they are running out of things to draft in the first round, positions to draft in the first round. I truly believe that it is defensive line and it is wide receiver right now. And if Ashton Genty somehow falls to them, that changes things. But I really do believe it's wide receiver and defensive line. That's where we stand, because there are so many great defensive linemen. And if the right wide receiver, aka Emeka Egbuka, falls to you, it's there. Now, Will Johnson's name is sliding down NFL draft boards. And if that happens, that's another name that you're looking at going, maybe that's who you take in the first round. But I just think they're running out of picks. They don't have any urgency bigger than these two. That could change in a month when free agency is done, but there's just nowhere else to go.
Let's jump to Grayson, who says, hey guys, I got another one for you. Do you collect sports cards? And if so, what is your holy grail or personal favorite?
I do not collect sports cards, actually. I've been thinking about getting into it for a little while now. I got a buddy who's real into it, but no, I do not. I'm still in like the weird, like I'm not like, maybe I don't follow enough Instagram pages. I don't know, but like you have to educate me every time I talk about it,
Yeah, I used to, and I have a bunch of them still, but I have no idea because I haven't looked at them in a long time. But I have like 18 boxes full of sports cards, and I'm sure there's a couple of good ones in there.
Dude, my dad, and this might actually work out like in my favor, but my dad, when I was born, because I was born in 96, bought a box of cards that said that it had that had like an image of Peyton Manning's rookie card on the box. Bought it, has not opened it, I'm not allowed to have it until he dies. And at that point, that's like he's like, this one day, this is going to feed your family. And I was like, okay, like, cool. Sounds good. He didn't even tell me about it until I was 18 years old. Kept it a secret until on my 18th birthday, he was like, I just want to show you this. You don't get to touch it, but this is it.
Just so you know, Noah, this is your inheritance. You're getting. That's
exactly what
it was. You better hope there's a good one in here.
That's exactly what it is. I'm getting nothing, dude. I'm getting nothing. Chances are I'm getting dead or something, but I'm getting that box of cards, dude. I'm getting that box of cards.
Let's go to Irresistible Fan, who has two questions here. First, what do you think about drafting Tyler Warren out of Penn State, then a running back, and then a defensive lineman, and get a wide receiver in free agency?
Yeah, I like Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren's super interesting. I don't know if a first-round tight end is what I'm looking for in the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think he's great. I think there's a chance that at 21, he is the best player on the board. There's an argument to be made there if he is. But if there are other options, I think I'm avoiding Tyler Warren and going with a different option. I also would not wait for defensive line to be the third. Defensive line's got to be top 2 pick in my eyes, whether it's 21 or 52. I don't care, but it's got to be one of the two. They're just too, like, there are too many really, really great defensive linemen in this draft. You have to be able to take advantage of one of them.
If the Steelers draft Tyler Warren in the first round, doesn't matter who it is. I like Tyler Warren a lot, but if they draft a tight end in the first round, 2 years after drafting Darnell Washington and 1 year after signing Pat Freiermuth to that extension, I got 2 words for him, and it's not the ones from WWE. 2 words: organizational malpractice. That is what I will be calling the Steelers out for if they do indeed draft Tyler Warren, which I don't expect.
No, but I mean, he could play quarterback too, so
he could play quarterback. He could play running back. He can do a lot of things, and he's going to do great for the Indianapolis Colts or somebody.
I was going to say, yeah, the Saints. Sounds like a good Saints player.
Let's go to the second question for Irresistible Fan. Says, can a college player refuse to participate in the draft and sign as a free agent instead?
No, they cannot. Once you are drafted, that is your team. Now, they don't have to come to the NFL. They've been, John Elway, there's Dan Marino, who pretty much just said, I'm good, dog. we're not playing for you. Eli Manning is another one that didn't want to play for the first pick in the draft and instead made it known that they would go play a different sport or they'd go back to college or something. And they can't go back to college anymore, but they could go do something else or not play in the NFL at all.
Could you imagine if Abdul Carter was just like, no, I don't want to play for the Browns. So he just signed with a UFL team, killed it in the UFL, and then signed as a late season free agent.
I wonder if that's a thing. I wonder if you could do that.
I feel like they'd have to block that. I feel like somebody would block that because they'd be like, there's no way, because that's going to open Pandora's box, and every good free agent's going to be, or every good draft prospect's going to be like, there's no chance I'm jumping in this draft. The Titans have the first pick. So I'm going to go there, and then I'm just going to play a little extra football, and then I'm going to sign with whoever the heck I want.
Yeah, that's like essentially, and you get to sign as a free agent, which means that your contract's going to be massive, like massive. Not everybody would do it, but I would imagine a lot of people would. There's no chance. And if there is, you need to become an NFL agent, figure this out, and all I want is a cut. Just a little tip on the side, a little 5% or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'd say
you'll be able to afford it.
Over under 3 players that do that before it gets shut down by the NFL. And just
but those 3 contracts, dude, you're living large.
That's true. You're doing 10% is still pretty good. You're looking pretty good. Let's go to Eddie the First, who says, hey fellas, what's the weakest position in the draft this year? I know there's an abundance of running backs and wideouts. So if say it's slim pickings at D line, did that affect the draft position choice?
No, the defensive line is, in my opinion, the deepest position in the NFL draft. So I would say, to be honest with you, wide receiver is not super deep in this NFL draft, at least not like top end. Like the running backs, there are probably 5 or 6 of them that are most likely day one starters. The defensive line, there's probably 20 that are day one starters. Obviously quarterback is super thin. I think wide receiver is not super deep. Corner is pretty deep. Obviously like safeties are weird. They're always weird. So I don't even count them. And linebackers are always very thin. So I think that counts. But in the Steelers realm of things, it's wide receiver, which I think affects them, that if Emeka Egbuka is there in the first round, you heavily consider it. That if a guy like Trey Harris is there in the second round, you heavily consider it, because at some point your options are going to like really dwindle and you don't want to miss that cut.
Let's go to Michael, who says a player can refuse to sign a contract, but then 2 years later become a UDFA. But I think what we were talking about before is, what if they just don't declare for the draft and then just go to the UFL? Because then they're not undrafted. They never went into the draft. So I think that's a weird, somebody's going to listen to this and somebody's going to be, well, you need to put that in the bylaws just down there in section 382, part 2. They can't do what Nick Belsky said on February 20th of 2025. Yeah.
That'd be actually, yes. But thank you, Michael. Shout out. I actually didn't know about the 2 years later you become a UDFA. That would be, your stock is depleted in that amount of time. But, it's a good workaround. It's a good workaround. What would you rather do? Like if you're, that's a great little scenario. If you're Brady Quinn and you're about to get drafted by the Browns, you know what I mean? Like you could, especially with the spring league now, you could go ball out in the spring league for 2 years, make zero money, and then come back and sign a 1-year prove it deal, ball out in the NFL, and then boom, for a better team.
I mean, technically,
Brady Quinn's a bad example, but like,
I was going to say technically Justin Fields did that with Chicago because I don't see them as an NFL team. But yes,
yeah, true. Very true.
Let's go to Roger Steeler again. Appreciate you. Says, who is the top free agent defensive lineman that the Steelers could go after?
Javon Hargraves is up there. I don't believe DJ Jones is up there, who's another option as well for the Steelers. To be honest, though, if they're going to really shoot for the stars, go get Trey Hendrickson. That's still my name to watch for them. But I don't think it's Javon Hargraves. It's DJ Jones. Then it's kind of like a bunch of guys who are starters, but I don't really think they raise the bar over Larry O.
Let's jump to John Malesko, who says, is there a chance the Steelers go after Isaiah Pola-Mao, safety from Las Vegas, has ties to the new secondary coach that we just brought back?
I think that is a possibility. I do think that's a possibility. He's actually pretty good too. Like I think he's got a lot of upside and would fit really well as a number 3 with Minka and Deshaun Elliott. He gives me a little bit more Deshaun vibes, but I do think that would be an option. Gerald Alexander, I'm interested to see who he recruits from Vegas. I do expect somebody. You know, I don't think the Steelers draft that third safety. I would imagine it's a veteran. I don't believe it's going to be DeMonte KZ. They're going to look for something new to see what they could get. I would say Isaiah is definitely an option.
Let's go to Brimstone, who says, if, and I mean if, they brought back Russ, don't you think the offseason comments have hurt his chances with Arthur Smith?
Yes and no. You know, this is the NFL. I say it all the time. Like, I'll talk to my wife. I'll talk to really anybody at any time. And they ask questions kind of like this one. It's just like, oh, man, dude, how are those two people cool? And it's like, I don't know. But in the NFL, there are no hard feelings almost ever. Like, this is just a group of people that have disagreements and definitely have tension. But there's never like a grudge. You know, it's never held like that. It's all business all the time. So I think things would be just fine, to be honest. I don't think it would really hurt. I think they're both professionals and would act like it.
Let's go to a duo of questions from Pittsburgh Heather. First, if the number 1 ranked wide receiver and the number 1 ranked running back are both on the board when the Steelers are drafting, which way do they go?
Oh, Ashton Genty all day. No questions asked.
McMillan?
Yes. He is would you go differently?
No, I'm just saying, like, no questions asked over.
Yeah, no questions asked. Okay. Ashton Genty is a top 10 player, maybe arguably, Fitzgerald agrees, maybe arguably higher in the NFL draft.
Fair. Let's go to Pittsburgh Heather's second question. If the Steelers have legit offers for George Pickens, is it preferred to get a proven starter back in the trade, i.e. a defensive lineman, or is it preferable to get a first-round pick for this year's draft?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, to be honest with you. I could guess, and I'll give you my guess. My guess would be a first-round pick, but I can't say that for certain. I don't know what position they'd want. If I had to guess, it'd be a first-round pick. Makes more sense. You get a pick of players instead of one name from that select team that you're working with, and you get them for 4 years, possibly 5, or you can move that draft pick.
Let's go to Matthew, who says, the day that Mike Tomlin leaves, do you see the Steelers shifting to a modern-day offense and defense?
Probably. But, I mean, we could be playing football on spaceships in 20 years when Mike Tomlin retires. You know, I don't know what's going on. So, yeah, I would say yes. What that defense looks like, I mean, it could be flag football by the time that day happens. We don't know. What I'm trying to say is it's going to be a long time.
Let's go to Enzo, who says, love the show, guys. What do you think about adding safety Javon Holland to buff up the secondary? Also, I saw today that Micah Parsons, if he doesn't get tagged, what's the chances?
Yeah, I don't think the chances are very high. He's going to go for a lot of money. The Steelers do not have that type of money to go. They have to give TJ Watt $30 million a year, and then they have to give Micah Parsons $35 million a year. That's not going to happen. So I would say low, although it would be a phenomenal hire or a phenomenal signing. Javon Holland, I like a lot. I don't know if he's going to be looking for a starting job. If he is, then, which most likely he is, then you're not going to get him. But if he's willing to come to Pittsburgh and be a 3-man rotation and probably see the field quite a bit in that 3-man rotation, I mean, it makes sense, especially if you could get him for under $15 million a year. I think that would be awesome.
Let's jump to Matthew Torres, who says, what are your thoughts on a starting offense that includes Aaron Rodgers, Judkins and Warren, Luther Burden, George Pickens, Christian Kirk, Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson, and Pat Freiermuth?
I don't think it's the worst. I think it's better than the offense that the Steelers had this past season. I don't think it's good enough, in my opinion. If you replaced Aaron Rodgers, I'd be pretty okay with the situation. I want to know where the defense stands. That's my big concern. Because I think Aaron Rodgers, Judkins, Warren, that's a great backfield. Luther Burden, George Pickens, Christian Kirk, and Calvin Austin, good starters. Roman Wilson off the bench, and obviously Pat Freiermuth. Like, I don't dislike any of that. I think you're probably going to have to give up on defense, though. Like, you're not getting that defensive lineman. You're not getting that corner. I think that's where it could come into play and really negatively affect this outcome.
Pittsburgh Heather has another one here that is it important that the Steelers get the quarterback situation settled before wide receivers will sign here, or is it more about contract terms?
No, you got to go get a quarterback. No, but who's signing? Chris Godwin's not going to pick up the phone and be like, oh, yeah, dude, I love Skylar Thompson. That's my guy right there. That's just, you got to get a quarterback. But I expect that to happen. The Steelers, I would be stunned, and it would be a wild move if the Pittsburgh Steelers signed a wide receiver before they signed a quarterback.
Yeah, they could just call and just say, hey, listen, trade for Chris Oladokun or I'm out, and then hang the phone up. And that's what every wide receiver is going to do in the open market. That's exactly
what they're going to do. Could you imagine? Like, that would, for one, it would put Ben's argument right to bed. Like, there is no argument against it. The Steelers signed a wide receiver without an active quarterback. I mean, that'd be awesome.
That's like trading Trevor Lawrence without a GM.
That's exactly what that is. And Omar Khan couldn't pull that off. And I don't think he's going to pull this one.
Let's go to Sparkaside, who says, all Steelers talk. Do you think it's possible we are able to exhaust our Bears credit and trade up for their first for Teteroa, McMillan, or Ginty, or another flashy pick?
Maybe. I think the Bears would give up a first-round pick for George Pickens, but I think it's a fool me twice, shame on you, fool me 3 times, maybe my GM gets fired. So I don't think it would happen, but that's like, it's the Najee Harris conversation. It's there's a team that's going to pay him too much money. There's a team that's going to give up too much for a George Pickens if they believe a George Pickens is worth it. So I would say chances are no, but I wouldn't say zero that a team that the Steelers have the piece in George Pickens, probably plus a little bit more, to get a first-round pick.
Let's go to Vibin with the Dog. Says Noah and Nick, what's good? Start bench cut. Chris Boswell, Jeff Reed, and Gary Anderson. Let's do it kickers edition.
Oh, all right. I'm starting Chris Boswell. Like, you got to give much respect to Gary Anderson. You have to. And shout out Jeff Reed. But I'm going Chris Boswell. I think when it's all said and done, he's the greatest kicker in Pittsburgh Steelers history. Gary Anderson is my bench, and Jeff Reed's cut. And shout out Jeff Reed, dude. He's a legend. But you got to give Gary Anderson, he's the OG.
Let's go to Enzo, who says, hey guys, love the show. What free agent receiver do you think is our first option?
Right now, where they currently stand, I think it's Chris Godwin. That would be my guess. He's just the top of the list. He moved up. And like, T. Higgins is a big, flashy, like, he's a big name, a lot of headlines signing. Chris Godwin is not that guy. He is a somewhat forgotten commodity in the wide receiver market. Everybody talks about all these young names. Not everybody mentions Chris Godwin. I think Chris Godwin would be first on their list, and probably is first on their list right now, outside of Cooper Kupp and maybe Debo in a trade.
We got 2 more to get to here. Let's start with Corey Davis, who is listening from Melbourne, Australia at 8:45 on Friday morning. Says, quick question. What was the first Steelers jersey that you guys got as a birthday or Christmas present, or you just bought it yourself?
Yeah, mine was Hines Ward. I was a big Hines Ward fan as a kid.
So was mine.
Yeah, there it is.
I mean, Palomalu was my favorite, but I got a Hines Ward, and I was very happy with that. So
that's good. That only makes us look more like brothers as this.
Yeah. It was the same jersey. It was just passed down.
You know. Yeah, that's actually it. I got it for 1 year, and then I gave it to Nick.
Exactly. That's what happened. Let's finish it off with this one from Doug V. Says, your favorite Mike Langism. Scratch my back with a hacksaw would probably be mine. Rest in peace to the Hall of Famer, Mike Lang.
Shout out, dude. Rest in peace to one of the biggest legends of all time in the city of Pittsburgh, just in general. You know, that guy was... Mike Lang was awesome. I'm super honored to have met him before, which feels, you know, something like I'm not worthy of sometimes. So, yeah, shout out Mike Lang, man. Rest in peace.
Pittsburgh sports. I
think Nick froze.
Oh,
nope, you're good. You're back.
I was going to say Pittsburgh sports has been blessed in general with Hall of Fame broadcasters. I mean, the Penguins had Mike Lang, the Steelers had Myron Cope, and the Pirates had Bob Prince. So it's really hard to not look at that and be very, very grateful. Gave my favorite is getting the fast lane the game ready to roll, because that's what I love. I absolutely love it.
Yes, at all times, which makes what we do 100 times better, because, you know, there are those slight chances we run into some of these legends from time to time. So, all right, is that all we got?
We do have one more, if you can actually hear me still, because I'm getting a little notification that my internet's crapping out. But Steeler Lee says, what are the retired jersey numbers for the Steelers?
Oof. It's Mean Joe Green, Terry Bradshaw, Franco. Oh, I think there's two more. I think there are two more. It's Mean Joe Green, it's Franco, it's Terry Bradshaw. Oh, who are the other two? I know there are two more. Nobody's tossing them in the chat yet?
Terry Bradshaw is not one of them, but it is Ernie Stautner.
Bernie Stautner. That's who I'm forgetting here. Yeah, Bradshaw's not, actually. You're right on that one. Wow. The Steelers need to retire more numbers. 100%. Should be Terry next.
That's a wrap for today then.
Awesome. With that said, guys, we are heading out of here. Thank you guys so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts. And as always, find all of our work at si.com/NFL/Steelers. Remember, we will be back tomorrow morning to head into the weekend. With that said, enjoy another beautiful day in the Berg. Peace.